Hi, my name is John Ricciardi, and I'm your host for the 7th episode of Coffee with Hiretual. In this episode, we're going to talk about using data to drive talent acquisition, and I'm just so excited that Hiretual brought me on board to talk about this subject. I'm currently the founder and managing partner of Afton Consulting Group, but have spent my entire career, quite frankly, in talent acquisition. The first 10 years of that was as a headhunter in the pharmaceutical industry before going into corporate recruiting, where I worked at both Aramark and Tyco, most recently, ultimately, leading talent acquisition in the Americas for Tyco. When I left there, I had an opportunity to spend about a year and a half working with Rob McIntosh and David Manister over at ERE, focusing nothing more than on data and metrics and how that can influence talent acquisition. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to get going. First thing that we are going to talk about is this is a big topic. Data, quite frankly, depends upon the person that you're talking to. If you're thinking about talent acquisition leaders, well, they're probably focused most on the metrics that drive the talent acquisition process: speed, productivity, cost, quality. If you're talking to your C-suite or your HR leadership, they're probably focused on your EEOC hiring data. However, the recruiting and sourcing team, they want to probably take a look at data that has more of an effect on their ability to attract and select the right candidates for the positions that they're currently working on. So it's incredibly important when we think about using data to drive the talent acquisition process that we think about the individuals who are going to be using that data. So the topic of today's episode isn't about collecting data, though. It's about using data to drive your talent acquisition function. And the key aspect to this is if you're going to use data to drive your talent acquisition function, you have to find a way to make that data actionable. So I want to give you a couple ideas of ways that you can use the data that you collect to make it actionable. So the first thing you need to do, quite frankly, is to engage your stakeholders. Gain some alignment on exactly what you're trying to accomplish. And with that direction, make sure you're measuring the right things and doing it properly. So specifically, when we're thinking about the talent acquisition process, you need to have a consistent process that your recruiting team is following, and you need to capture that process real time in the ATS. That's going to prevent you from having any sort of data integrity issues on the back end of this. The next thing you're going to need to do is segment your data and give it some context. Like I said before, I had been the talent acquisition lead for the Americas at Tyco. We had over 5,000 hires a year, and saying something like my team lowered time to fill really didn't mean anything because it could have been one country influencing it or the other. So you need to really segment that data, and that could be by geography, it could be by function, level, etc. And then give it context, understand a little bit more why that's happening. Which leads us to our last point, which is to formulate a hypothesis and have a plan. This actually requires a lot of courage to be the subject matter expert that you are. Take the data, bring it to the table across from your stakeholders that are sitting on the other side of the table, and share what you know. Share your knowledge, formulate that hypothesis, share it with them, and leave with a plan of action. Doing these things will help you make the data that you've collected more actionable and help you influence the recruiting process. In order to make sure that we are covering on all the topics that you're interested in hearing about, we reached out to the audience for some questions. And the first question that came in is, what are the key metrics? And this isn't actually an easy one, so I'm going to show you what some of those key metrics are because they're listed all right on Wikipedia. So here we are on Wikipedia. By coming to the page and simply typing in recruiting metrics, what we're going to find is a full page dedicated to talent acquisition process-related recruiting metrics. This page was created by talent acquisition leaders Multiple people had some input here. As you scroll down, what you're going to see is each metric is listed out by metric type or the title of the metric. You have its definition, as well as the formula you need to generate that metric internally. They're also broken out into groupings by speed, quality, productivity, as well as cost. So take a look at the page, review it. There's plenty to see here, and see what makes the most sense for implementing for your internal function. Our next question is, what are 3 to 4 metrics that I should be measuring? The first one of these is applicant cycle time. Quite frankly, it is my favorite metric to use. Applicant cycle time measures only the candidates that are hired. And what it does is it actually measures the time from their application until the time they accept the offer. Now, it's a speed-based metric, of course, but it isn't based on time to fill. We're not measuring how long the position's been open. Rather, what we're measuring is, once we've identified the correct candidate, how efficient are we at getting that person through the selection process? So it takes out some of the variables such as hard to find talent or external factors in the marketplace, etc. It's simply measuring, once you found that right person on paper, how quickly can you get them through the process and onboarded into your company? The second metric I like to talk about is funnel throughput. And what we're measuring here is, how many screens does your recruiting team do in order to make a submittal to the hiring manager? And how many submittals to the hiring manager equal one interview? And how many interviews equal an offer? And quite frankly, how many offers equal a hire? So I like to take a look at that to understand how we're doing. This is a quality metric. It allows us to understand, are we throwing paper across at our stakeholders? Are we spending too much time focused on doing too many screens as opposed to doing a better job of just screening people out at the application phase? I don't look a little bit higher than that. So the natural question to ask here is, why not look at how many applications you need to have a phone screen? And the reason I don't like that is because the application piece is too variable. You can have multiple applications from unqualified people. You can have a lack of applications in certain geographies just because of the external factors, etc. So really, when I look at funnel throughput, I try to look at this starting at the screening phase for the talent acquisition team. The last one that I'm going to mention today is source of hire. I know that you don't have unlimited time, effort, or budget, so it's really important that at the end of the day we put our focus on what our ultimate goal is, and that ultimate goal is to make a hire. It's critically important that you segment this. You're going to want to look at both function, geography, even probably leveling when you look at source of hire, and then you can put the right effort and investment in time, effort, and money into the places that are going to show you the highest return on that investment. Now, there's 2 things we didn't talk about in these metrics, and the first one is cost. I think you should measure it. There's a great formula that Sharm put out that you can use. However, having come from highly matrixed international organizations, I found it very difficult to find all of the pieces of information that they were looking for. So you may have to craft your own version of that cost metric or cost per hire metric. The second one is quality. And while quality, without question, is the most important metric to measure, in an episode of Coffee with Hiretual, I'm not going to be able to speak to everyone who watches this and understand what quality is and how that particular organization defines quality. So sit down with your company. The 2 challenges here are defining what quality is, and number 2, measuring it. Even once you find out and you can come to a conceptual idea of what quality is, many times your systems won't talk to one another. The ATS won't talk to the HRIS, and finding things like ratings and performance reviews, etc., becomes a challenge, and you may find that difficult. So Good luck. I think you should measure both quality and cost in addition to applicant cycle time, funnel throughput, and source of hire. You just may have to craft those last two metrics internally for yourself. Our third question from the audience is, given the external market changes, how should recruiters change the way they collect and leverage data? I like this question because it's actually the only question we received that wasn't based on metrics. It was simply focused on data. Moving forward, I think it's going to be critically important that companies focus on a personalized outreach to their candidates, and that they're communicating with candidates through the mediums of the candidate's choice, not a medium of the company's choice. Recruiting teams have always been really good at finding talent, whether that's online, in social media, resume databases, etc. What we're talking about here, though, is converting those candidates into applicants. And in order to do so, once you found that person, you're going to need to enhance the data that you have on them. You can do this through plenty of systems. You can use something like a Hiretual, as well as many others, to get some more information about the particular candidate. You're going to need to capture that somewhere, because there's going to be a lot of information that you use, and memorialize that, both for use now and in the future. But most importantly is individualize your outreach to that person. Make a deeper connection based off the fact that you took the time to learn about the individual. And I think that the companies that do this effectively, this evolution's been in process for a while, and I think that the companies that do this effectively are going to be the ones that reap the most benefits and have the most highly performing talent acquisition teams out there. So before we wrap this up, I want to talk a little bit about engaging your stakeholders and share with you a story that comes from my past, specifically my time when I was at Tyco. One of my first role there was leading the recruiting function for their ADT business, and we did a great job in the first year. The team really responded to some of the changes we made, and we lowered sales hiring by like 15 days on our time to fill. Super proud of this. Went down to see the vice president of sales, strode into his office, proud as a peacock, and subsequently told him that based on the work that we've done, we lowered time to fill for your group by 15 days. And he looked up from his desk and he deadpanned me. He said, "That's great, but that's your metric, John. I really don't understand why I care. Now get out of my office." Really put my tail between my legs at that point. Crawled back to my office, probably shut off the lights at that point and weeped a little bit, trying to figure out how that got sideways on me. I mean, I just couldn't understand. We lowered time to fill by over 2 weeks, and the senior leader had zero interest in hearing anything about it. In fact, he said that was my metric. Well, it's not really my metric. I'm hiring for him. I don't understand why he wouldn't be more excited. So I thought about it and tried to get a better feel for why wouldn't he be as excited as I was. And then I realized that maybe we weren't speaking the same language. What do salespeople know? Well, they know numbers, they know quotas, they know money, quite frankly. So I started to do some thinking, and we did 1,000 hires a year for this individual. And we lowered time to fill by 15 days. Well, if we're doing 1,000 hires in a year and we lowered it by 15 days, well, that's 15,000 extra working days that we just put back into his workforce. Well, that's got to be worth something. So I took a look at the quota for his new salespeople. And if you divided the quota by the amount of days, well, it worked out to be about $500 a day in production. So I went back and I said, all right, so we have 15,000 working days. We have $500 a day. Well, there's $7.5 million that is potentially back into his budget, or increasing his budget or its quota, because we were more effective at bringing folks on board. And I went in and shared it with him exactly this way. I said, the reason you care that we lowered time to fill by 15 days is that you now have the opportunity to add $7.5 million to your top line because of our efficiencies. And I left before he could argue with me. I didn't want to get shot down twice, but we did have some good future conversations, and he started to understand a little bit more on how this partnership with recruiting could positively affect his bottom line. So in conclusion, today we talked about the different people and the way that data may be different depending upon who you are, whether you're a talent acquisition leader, recruiter or sourcer, or maybe a stakeholder in the process. We talked about how to take that data that you've collected and make it actionable so that you can use that to influence your recruiting. I provided you with a list of industry metrics to consider using, as well as 3 of my favorites, actually 5 of my favorites, but 3 that you can implement right away and 2 more that you probably have to take a look at and adjust them for your company, but are equally as important to start measuring. We talked a little bit about using data to better attract and select more highly qualified candidate pool. And then we talked about engaging our stakeholders some. How can you take all this and put it into action so that you can have a better relationship with your stakeholders and firmly cement yourself as a subject matter expert? So I hope you learned some today. I hope you had a little bit of fun. If you'd like to connect with me online, I'd love to hear from you and any follow-up questions that you may have. Again, I'm John Ricciardi from Afton Consulting Group, and this has been Coffee with Hiretual.